The shadow claw drifted silently through the asteroid field, its bioluminescent hull pulsing with predatory patience. Captain Vexhai of the Korthak Hunting Guild flicked his forked tongue across his scaled lips, tasting the metallic tang of anticipation in the recycled air. Target acquired, Captain, hissed his second-in-command, Skeltar, from the sensor station. Human vessel, civilian class. Single life sign detected. Vexhai's reptilian eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The Korthak had been hunting humans for decades, ever since the soft-skinned mammals had begun expanding into their territory. Humans were prized quarry, intelligent enough to provide sport, but lacking the natural weapons of proper predators. Their meat was considered a delicacy across 3 star systems. Just one. Vexhai's disappointment was palpable. Hardly worth the fuel costs. Wait, Captain. Skeltar's scales rippled with confusion as he recalibrated his instruments. I'm detecting something else. Small. Quadrupedal. The biosignatures are unusual. Through the view screen, they observed their prey. A battered mining shuttle, clearly damaged and drifting. Emergency lights blinked weakly along its hull. Inside that fragile metal shell was their quarry, another human to add to their collection. The Korthak were apex predators from a world where only the strongest survived. Their society was built on the hunt, on the taking of worthy prey. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws, armored scales, and muscles that could crush steel. They had conquered 17 systems through sheer predatory excellence. One small human would barely qualify as an appetizer. Deploy the capture nets, Vexhai commanded. Let's see what terror looks like in human eyes. Inside the mining shuttle Lucky Strike, 12-year-old Maya Chen pressed herself against the bulkhead, her dark eyes wide with fear. The ship's emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the cramped interior, and she could hear the alien vessel's hull grinding against theirs as it maneuvered for boarding. She clutched a small, furry form against her chest, a creature no larger than a medium-sized dog, with distinctive black and white striped fur and small, intelligent eyes. The honey badger, whom Maya had named Ripley after her favorite movie character, stirred restlessly in her arms. Maya's parents had been xenobiologists, studying Earth's most resilient species for potential applications in off-world colonization. Ripley had been their prize subject, a honey badger whose aggression and fearlessness made her species legendary. When the mining accident claimed her parents' lives, Maya had been the only survivor, along with her parents' research specimens. That was 3 days ago. Since then, she'd been drifting through space, too young to properly navigate the damaged ship, surviving on emergency rations and hope. The hull shuddered as something powerful clamped onto the outer airlock. Maya's breath came in short gasps as she heard the unmistakable sound of cutting tools working through the ship's defenses. "It's okay, Ripley," she whispered to the honey badger, though her voice trembled. "We're going to be okay." But even as she said it, Maya knew it was a lie. She'd heard the stories about the Korthak, how they hunted humans for sport and food, how they kept trophies from their kills. Her parents had warned her about them during their long journey to the mining station. The cutting stopped. Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then the airlock exploded inward. Through the smoke and debris came nightmares-given flesh. Towering reptilian forms with glowing eyes and claws that gleamed like obsidian blades. Their leader stepped forward, and Maya could smell the predator musk that clung to his scales. "Ah," Vexhai purred, his voice a sibilant whisper. "A youngling. How disappointing. I was hoping for more of a challenge." Maya pressed herself deeper into the corner. Ripley still clutched protectively in her arms. The honey badger was completely still now, but Maya could feel the tension in her small body, like a coiled spring. "Please," Maya whispered. "I'm just a kid. I haven't done anything to you." Vexhai's laugh was like grinding glass. "Child, you exist. That is offense enough. Your species spreads across the galaxy like a plague, claiming worlds that belong to worthier predators." He gestured to his companions. "Skeltar, prepare the preservation chamber. This one is small, but her terror will season the meat nicely." As the alien hunters moved closer, Maya felt hot tears streaming down her cheeks. She thought of her parents, of the bedtime stories they used to tell her about brave explorers facing impossible odds. She thought of all the things she'd never get to do, all the places she'd never see. But most of all, she thought about Ripley and the stories her mother used to tell about honey badgers, how they never backed down, how they fought creatures 10 times their size, how they were pound for pound the most fearless animals on Earth. "I'm sorry, girl," Maya whispered into Ripley's fur. "I'm so sorry." That's when Ripley opened her eyes. And for the first time since boarding the human ship, Captain Vexhai felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of hunting. He felt afraid. The honey badger's transformation was subtle at first, just a slight tensing of muscles, a barely perceptible shift in breathing. But Maya, who had grown up around her parents' research subjects, recognized the signs immediately. Ripley wasn't just waking up. She was going to war. "What is that creature?" Skeltar hissed, his thermal sensors picking up the sudden spike in the small animal's body temperature and heart rate. Vexhai studied the black and white striped animal with growing unease. Something about its posture, the way it held its head, triggered ancient predatory instincts buried deep in his genetic memory. It appears to be some form of earth mustelid. Harmless, surely. He couldn't have been more wrong. Ripley's species had earned their reputation through millions of years of evolution on a continent where everything, from venomous snakes to massive predators, wanted to kill them. They had survived by developing two crucial traits: an almost supernatural resistance to toxins and pain, and an absolute refusal to back down from any fight, regardless of size or odds. The honey badger's small, dark eyes fixed on Vexhai with an intensity that made the 8-foot reptilian predator take an involuntary step backward. In that gaze was something the Korthak had never encountered in any prey species: complete and utter fearlessness mixed with calculated malice. "Maya," Ripley seemed to whisper, though honey badgers couldn't speak. The sound was more of a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through her chest. "Run." What happened next would be talked about in Korthak hunting lodges for generations to come, assuming any of them survived to tell the tale. Ripley launched herself from Maya's arms with explosive force, her 40-pound frame moving with the speed and precision of a guided missile. Her target wasn't the nearest Korthak or even the largest. She went straight for the leader. Vexhai's reflexes were lightning fast by galactic standards. He was a predator who had hunted and killed creatures across 17 star systems. His claws came up in a defensive gesture that should have bisected the small Earth creature before it could reach him. The claws passed harmlessly through empty air as Ripley twisted mid-flight, her flexible spine allowing her to contort her body in ways that defied physics. She landed on Vexhai's armored chest and immediately went for his throat. The captain's scream of surprise turned into a roar of pain as needle-sharp teeth punched through his scales. Honey badgers possessed one of the strongest bite forces relative to body size in Earth's animal kingdom, and Ripley used every pound per square inch to maximum effect. "Get it off! Get it off!" Vexhai staggered backward, clawing desperately at the small fury attached to his neck. His talons, sharp enough to rend steel, scraped across Ripley's hide without effect. Honey badger skin was legendarily tough and loose, evolved to allow them to turn and fight even when gripped by larger predators. Skeltar raised his plasma rifle, but hesitated. The small creature was moving too fast, and any shot risked hitting his captain. "I can't get a clean." His words were cut off as Ripley released her grip on Vexhai and bounded toward him in a series of fluid leaps. The second in command had perhaps a millisecond to appreciate the honey badger's strategy. She wasn't just attacking randomly. She was systematically eliminating the most dangerous threats first. The plasma rifle clattered to the deck as Skeltar screamed. Ripley had clamped her jaws around his wrist with hydraulic pressure, her powerful neck muscles twisting and worrying the appendage like a dog with a chew toy. The sound of scales and cartilage tearing was audible over the alien's shrieks. The third Korthak, a hunter named Krexval, finally overcame his shock and lunged forward with a crystal-edged blade. The weapon was crafted from compressed stellar material and could cut through battleship armor. It bounced off Ripley's back without leaving so much as a scratch. Honey badger skin wasn't just tough, it was ridiculously, almost comically over-engineered by evolution. The hide was thick enough to turn aside the fangs of cobras and the claws of leopards. A primitive alien blade, no matter how exotic its composition, simply couldn't penetrate the natural armor that had protected honey badgers through millions of years of African survival. Ripley spun around and fixed her attention on Krexvel. The hunter found himself staring into the eyes of something that evolution had specifically designed to not care about pain, fear, or self-preservation. Something that would fight until either it or its enemy was dead, with no concept of retreat or surrender. "Impossible," he whispered in his native tongue. "It's just a small animal." Ripley's response was to leap directly at his face. Maya watched in stunned amazement as her small companion systematically dismantled 3 alien predators, each 5 times her size. The sounds were horrible, screaming, tearing, the wet noise of teeth finding flesh. But Maya felt no sympathy for her would-be captors. These creatures had intended to torture and eat her. Ripley was simply reminding them why Earth had produced some of the most effective predators in the galaxy. Vexhai, blood streaming from the puncture wounds in his throat, managed to grab a plasma grenade from his belt. "Enough!" he roared. "I'll kill us all before I let some pet make a mockery of the Korthak." His finger moved toward the activation stud. Maya's eyes went wide with terror. A plasma grenade would vaporize the entire ship, along with her and Ripley. That's when she discovered that humans, too, had their own evolutionary gifts. "Ripley, no!" Maya screamed, her voice cracking with the primal fury of a species that had once hunted megafauna with nothing but sharpened sticks and absolute determination. The honey badger froze mid-attack, her head swiveling toward Maya with perfect understanding. In that instant of communication between human and animal, a plan formed that required no words or complex strategy. It required only trust, timing, and the kind of desperate courage that had carried humanity to the stars. Maya Chen had grown up listening to her parents' research recordings, absorbing years of behavioral data about Earth's most remarkable creatures. She knew things about honey badgers that even most xenobiologists didn't understand, like how they occasionally worked in pairs to take down prey much larger than themselves. She also knew that humans weren't just tool users or social creatures. Deep in their DNA was the memory of being persistence hunters, of running down prey across vast distances through sheer determination and coordinated pack tactics. Right now, she was about to prove that evolution had given both species exactly what they needed to survive. "Ripley, Pattern 7. Maya shouted, using one of the training commands her mother had developed during their research. The honey badger instantly disengaged from Krexval and bounded toward the ship's narrow maintenance crawlspace. To the Korthak, it looked like the creature was retreating, exactly what Maya wanted them to think. Vexhai's scaled lips pulled back in a triumphant snarl. "Yes, run, little beast. See how courage serves you when." His words cut off as Maya suddenly stepped forward, placing herself directly between the wounded aliens and the crawlspace entrance. The 12-year-old girl should have been cowering in terror. Instead, she stood with her feet planted wide, her young face set in an expression of deadly calm. "You made a mistake," she said quietly. Skeltar, still clutching his mangled wrist, let out a bark of laughter. "What mistake, little human? Your pet has fled, and you are alone with 3 Korthak hunters." Maya's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "You assumed we were the prey." The maintenance hatch above them opened with a soft hiss. Honey badgers were excellent climbers, capable of scaling sheer rock faces and trees with equal ease. The Lucky Strike's maintenance tunnels had been designed for human engineers, which meant they were perfectly sized for a 40-pound predator who had just spent 3 minutes learning the ship's layout. Ripley dropped from the ceiling directly onto Vexhai's head. But this time she wasn't alone. Maya had grabbed her father's emergency toolkit, the one containing plasma cutters, molecular welders, and other devices designed to slice through starship hulls. As Ripley engaged the captain, Maya darted forward with the speed and agility that had once allowed her ancestors to chase down antelopes across the African savanna. The plasma cutter hummed to life in her hands. Krexval spun toward her, crystal blade raised for a killing blow. He was a trained warrior, an apex predator whose species had conquered solar systems. Surely he could handle one small human child. He had forgotten that human children on frontier worlds weren't raised in comfortable environments. They were raised to survive in hostile conditions, to handle dangerous equipment, and to think quickly under pressure. Maya rolled under his swing with fluid grace, came up inside his guard, and activated the plasma cutter directly against his kneecap. The smell of burned scales and flesh filled the air as Korthak collapsed, howling. Maya was already moving, the plasma cutter whining as it recharged for another strike. Impossible! Skeletor backed toward the airlock, his good hand fumbling for his communicator. Captain, we need reinforcements. The humans. They're not acting like prey. HFY couldn't answer. He was too busy trying to dislodge a honey badger who had apparently decided that his skull made an excellent chew toy. Ripley's claws had found purchase in his thick scales, and she was methodically working her way toward his brain stem with the patience of a creature who had once been observed digging through concrete to reach a beehive. Maya turned her attention to Skeletor. The wounded alien was larger, stronger, and far more experienced in combat. Under normal circumstances, he should have been able to crush her with one hand. But these weren't normal circumstances. Maya had been raised by parents who studied Earth's most dangerous creatures. She had learned that size and strength meant nothing compared to intelligence, adaptability, and absolute refusal to give up. She had watched recordings of honey badgers driving off lions, of humans surviving in environments that should have killed them, of Earth creatures thriving in conditions that would destroy supposedly superior alien species. She had learned that the most dangerous predator wasn't always the biggest or strongest. It was the one that refused to quit. You know what the funny thing is? Maya said conversationally as she stalked toward Skeletor, the plasma cutter humming in her hands. My parents always wondered why honey badgers were so fearless. They thought it might be a genetic quirk or some kind of neurological adaptation. Skeletor pressed himself against the airlock door, his communication device sparking and useless. The ship's systems had been damaged in the attack, and his calls for help were going nowhere. But I think they were wrong, Maya continued. I think honey badgers are fearless because they understand something that most species never figure out. She was close enough now to see the terror in Skeletor's reptilian eyes. This was a predator who had never known fear, who had spent his entire life at the top of the food chain. Now he was experiencing what every prey species felt in their final moments. They understand that if you're going to die anyway, you might as well take your enemies with you. Maya raised the plasma cutter. Behind her, HFY's struggles were growing weaker as Ripley continued her methodical work. The captain's claws scraped feebly at the honey badger's hide, but his strength was fading along with his blood. Korthak had stopped screaming and was now making soft whimpering sounds as he clutched his ruined leg. 3 Korthak hunters, apex predators from a warrior species, had been systematically destroyed by a 12-year-old human girl and her honey badger. And Maya wasn't done yet. Now, she said to Skeletor, let's discuss the terms of your surrender. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The hunters had become the hunted, and Earth's supposedly weak prey species were revealing just why they had spread across the galaxy despite their soft skin and lack of natural weapons. They were too stubborn to die quietly, and too smart to fight fair. Captain HFY had always prided himself on his predatory instincts. They had served him well through decades of hunting, allowing him to read prey behavior and predict their desperate attempts at escape. But as he lay bleeding on the deck with a honey badger methodically working her way through his nervous system, he realized those same instincts were now screaming a warning he should have heeded from the beginning. This wasn't prey behavior. This was alpha predator behavior. Through his fading vision, he watched the human child negotiate with Skeletor like a seasoned warrior. Her voice was calm, controlled, absolutely devoid of the fear that should have been paralyzing a youngling of her species. Instead, she spoke with the confidence of something that had never doubted its place at the top of the food chain. Here's what's going to happen, Maya said, keeping the plasma cutter trained on Skeletor's center mass. You're going to call off any other ships in your hunting pack. You're going to provide me with navigation data to the nearest human colony. And you're going to do it right now. Skeletor's scales rippled with indignation. You cannot command a Korthak hunter. We are apex predators. Maya tilted her head slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to be more threatening than any roar or snarl. Are bleeding on my ship and begging for mercy. Yes, I noticed. The simple statement hit harder than any threat could have. Skeltar looked around at his fallen packmates. Krexval unconscious from pain and blood loss, Vexhai barely clinging to life as Ripley continued her work, and felt something crack inside his worldview. They weren't just losing to prey animals. They were being systematically dismantled by a creature barely out of childhood and her small companion, with the kind of cold efficiency that spoke of instincts honed over millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Impossible, he whispered. Humans are weak, soft. Your species has no natural weapons, no armor, no fear, Maya finished. That's what you keep missing. You think we're weak because we don't have claws or fangs or scales. But you know what we do have. She gestured toward Ripley, who had finally finished with Vexhai and was now sitting on the captain's chest like a blood-soaked guardian statue. The honey badger's small, intelligent eyes were fixed on Skeltar with the kind of attention a cat gives to a particularly interesting mouse. We have friends, Maya said simply, and we're very, very good at making them. The truth of it hit Skeltar like a physical blow. Humans didn't conquer through superior firepower or natural weapons. They conquered through alliance, adaptation, and an almost supernatural ability to turn other species into extensions of their own capabilities. They had domesticated wolves and turned them into dogs. They had partnered with horses to become cavalry. They had learned to work with dolphins, trained birds of prey, and formed bonds with creatures across dozens of worlds. And now this small human had somehow weaponized one of Earth's most fearless predators. Your communication system, Maya said patiently. Now. Skeltar's hands shook as he activated his personal communicator. The device crackled to life, immediately filling with concerned voices speaking in the harsh Korthak tongue. Skeltar, report. We detected weapons fire. What is your status? Maya held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Skeltar placed the communicator in her palm. She studied it for a few seconds. Her parents' research had included xenotechnology interfaces and activated the translation matrix. This is Maya Chen, she said into the device, her 12-year-old voice carrying clearly across the communication channel. I'm currently holding 3 Korthak hunters prisoner aboard the human vessel Lucky Strike. To whom am I speaking? The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, a new voice responded, deeper, older, filled with the kind of authority that came from years of successful hunts. This is Pack Leader Thexmore of the Bloodfang. Human child, you will release my hunters immediately or face the consequences. Maya's laugh was like ice cracking. Pack Leader, your hunters boarded my vessel with the intent to torture, kill, and eat me. I'm a minor, by the way, what you might consider a juvenile. They were planning to murder a child for sport. Another pause. When Thexmore spoke again, there was something new in his voice. Uncertainty. This is not possible. 3 Korthak hunters cannot be defeated by a single human child. Would you like me to send you visual confirmation? Maya asked pleasantly. I can provide real-time footage of your pack leader's current condition. Though I should warn you, it's quite graphic. She gestured to Ripley, who obligingly lifted one small paw and placed it on Vexhai's throat. The captain made a weak gurgling sound. Alternatively, Maya continued, we can discuss terms for their release and safe passage for myself to the nearest human colony. The communication channel exploded with angry Korthak voices, all speaking at once. Maya waited patiently until the noise died down. I understand this is unprecedented, she said when silence returned. Your species has built its reputation on being apex predators. You've probably never encountered serious resistance from prey species before, but I think you're operating under some fundamental misunderstandings about humans. She knelt beside Vexhai and gently scratched behind Ripley's ears. The honey badger leaned into the touch, her fierce expression softening momentarily. We're not prey, Maya said softly. We never were prey. We're persistence hunters who learned to use tools and make alliances. We're the species that looked at creatures 10 times our size and decided they looked tasty. We're the ones who turned wolves into pets and horses into partners. She stood up, her young face serious. And when you threaten our pack, even if it's a pack of one girl and one honey badger, we become something your species has never encountered before. And what is that? Thexmore's voice was barely a whisper. Maya's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. We become the apex predators. The communication channel went silent. In that silence, every Korthak listening began to understand that their species had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that soft skin and lack of natural weapons meant weakness. They had forgotten that the most dangerous predators were often the ones that didn't look dangerous until it was too late. And now they were about to learn why humans had spread across the galaxy despite being surrounded by species that should have been able to crush them. They were about to learn what it meant to face an enemy that simply refused to lose. 3 hours later, the Korthak hunting fleet hung motionless in space, their weapons powered down, their pride in ruins. Pack leader Thexmore stared at the tactical display showing the human mining vessel at the center of his formation, and tried to comprehend how everything had gone so wrong. 12 Korthak ships, over 200 elite hunters, the finest predatory species in 3 star systems, all held at bay by a 12-year-old human child and her honey badger. The negotiation had been unlike anything in Korthak history. Instead of the desperate pleading they expected from prey species, Maya Chen had conducted herself like a seasoned diplomat, one who happened to be holding their pack leader at the mercy of a creature that apparently viewed 8-foot reptilian predators as light snacks. Your terms are acceptable, Thexmore finally transmitted, his voice heavy with a defeat he still couldn't quite believe. On the view screen, Maya nodded graciously. Behind her, Skeltar and Krexval were applying emergency medical supplies to their wounds, while Ripley supervised from her perch atop the comatose Vexhai. The honey badger's small, dark eyes tracked every movement with predatory attention. I'm glad we could reach an understanding, Maya replied. Safe passage to the Kepler station, full medical treatment for your injured hunters, and a formal treaty recognizing human space travelers as protected under Korthak law. In exchange, I'll provide you with detailed behavioral analysis of honey badgers, including their potential applications in your own hunting strategies. It was that last part that had sealed the deal. Maya had realized something that her parents' research had only hinted at. Honey badgers weren't just fearless predators. They were tactical geniuses, capable of complex problem-solving and strategic thinking that rivaled any sentient species. And she had just demonstrated how devastating they could be when properly partnered with human intelligence. The medical data alone will revolutionize our understanding of pain tolerance and healing factors, Maya continued. I've also included preliminary notes on pack hunting strategies that combine human tool use with honey badger natural abilities. Consider it a foundation for future cooperation between our species. Thexmore's scales rippled with something that might have been respect. The human child was offering them not just a way out of an impossible situation, but genuine tactical advantages. She was transforming their defeat into a potential alliance. It was the kind of strategic thinking that marked a true apex predator. You realize, he said slowly, that this will change everything. The Korthak have built our society on the principle that might makes right, that the strong naturally dominate the weak. Maya's expression grew thoughtful. Maybe that's the problem. On Earth, we learned that the most successful predators aren't always the biggest or strongest. They're the ones that adapt, that form alliances, that find ways to turn every encounter into an advantage. She gestured toward Ripley, who was now grooming herself with the casual indifference of a creature that had just redefined interstellar power dynamics. Honey badgers don't care how big their opponents are. They just care about winning. And humans, well, we're really good at helping our friends win. The implications were staggering. If other species learned to apply human alliance-building strategies with their own natural advantages, the entire galactic balance of power could shift overnight. There is one more thing, Maya added, her young voice carrying a note of steel that made Thexmore's predatory instincts twitch with warning. This treaty includes a clause about the treatment of human children. Any species that targets human juveniles for hunting or consumption will find themselves facing not just humanity, but all of our allies. She smiled, and for the first time, Thexmore understood why humans had managed to spread across the galaxy despite their apparent physical limitations. And pack leader? We make friends very easily. The communication channel went silent as the full weight of that threat sank in. Humans didn't just form alliances with other sentient species. They bonded with creatures from across the evolutionary spectrum: predators, prey animals, even plants and microorganisms. They turned entire ecosystems into extensions of their own capabilities. A species that could weaponize honey badgers could probably weaponize anything. As the Korthak fleet began to disperse, carrying word of their defeat to the far corners of the galaxy, Maya settled back in the pilot's seat of the Lucky Strike. Ripley had finally finished her grooming and had curled up in Maya's lap, her small form radiating contentment. "Good girl," Maya whispered, scratching behind the honey badger's ears. "You did so good, Ripley." The honey badger made a soft chittering sound that might have been agreement. She had protected her human, eliminated the threats, and secured their continued survival. As far as she was concerned, it had been a perfectly normal day. Maya began plotting a course for Kepler Station, where she would finally be reunited with other humans. But she also began composing her first xenobiology report, a document that would eventually become known as the Chen Accords and would reshape interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. The report would describe how a 12-year-old girl and her honey badger had faced down an entire predatory species and emerged victorious. But more importantly, it would explain the principles that had made their victory possible: adaptation over aggression, alliance over dominance, and the understanding that true apex predators weren't born. They were forged through partnership and mutual support. Within a year, the Chen Accords would be required reading in xenobiology programs across human space. Within 5 years, they would form the foundation for humanity's first major interspecies alliance treaty. And within a decade, the sight of humans traveling with Earth companion animals would become so common that other species would simply assume they were looking at a single, terrifyingly effective collective organism. They wouldn't be entirely wrong. As the Lucky Strike engaged its FTL drive and jumped toward human space, Maya smiled and gave Ripley one last scratch behind the ears. "Come on, girl," she said softly. "Let's go home." Behind them, the scattered Korthak fleet carried a new message across the galaxy. Humans weren't prey. They were partners, and that made them the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever seen. 6 months later, at the Galactic Species Council, Ambassador Thexmore stood before representatives from 47 different worlds and delivered his final report on the Korthak human incident. "We believed we were hunting prey," he concluded, his scales still bearing faint scars from his encounter with Maya and Ripley. "Instead, we discovered that we were facing a species that had already solved the ultimate predator equation." He gestured to a holographic display showing Earth and its countless companion species. "They don't just hunt. They recruit. Every alliance they form, every creature they befriend, every partnership they establish makes them exponentially more dangerous. A human alone is formidable. A human with allies is unstoppable." The council chamber was silent as the implications sank in. "The Korthak have formally requested inclusion in the Human Protection Treaty," Thexmore continued. "Not as conquerors, but as junior partners. We have much to learn from a species that turned honey badgers into strategic weapons." In the gallery, Maya Chen, now 13 and attending the council session as humanity's youngest diplomatic observer, exchanged a glance with Ripley. The honey badger, wearing a tiny diplomatic vest that identified her as Maya's official companion and co-negotiator, chittered softly. They had come a long way from that damaged mining ship. But then again, that's what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They made friends. And they never, ever gave up. As the council session continued, species after species began to request information about forming alliances with humanity. They had all learned the same lesson the Korthak had discovered the hard way. In a galaxy full of predators, the most dangerous species was the one that turned everyone else into family. And humanity was very, very good at making friends.